guys, Lucas Sacco here. Today we have a hand trap tier list for the Phantom Nightmare format, the 2024 format. Just get straight into it. All these hand traps down here, these are the ones that are not viable. They're just pre-created in the spreadsheet, so I went ahead and throw them at the bottom. If you had questions about these, just assume they're unplayable. These cards are really not that good. Starting off, don't have to waste your guys' time, we have Ash Blossom. This card is obviously one of the top 6 hand traps ever printed. Maybe even the best hand trap ever printed. The only problem with Ash Blossom in this current format is that it's a fire, so if you Ash Blossom them, they can Hida, take your Ash Blossom, then make a Promethean. Promethean revives something that gets them to an Ambler Well. It gets them to minimum 1 disruption, is the point I'm getting to here. And not to mention, it is kind of a weaker hand trap, so then they can Talents Lick your hand and use it as an extender. But the card is still worth playing. It is very strong. Next thing here is Phantasme. Phantasme is an interesting choice because there are a lot of hand traps that you could play in this next format. My only grievance with Phantasme is that it's not a guaranteed another disruption, and honestly, the targeting protection really isn't that important, so I'm going to stick it down here in situational / tech option. Mourner, I think this card is okay. I think that Vader and Impam are some of the strongest hand traps in the format. However, they're really good when your opponent normal summons Ash, and that's just something that you can't hit with Mourner. Even when your opponent normal summons Ash and you Valor it, if they chain Kieran, it still trades pretty plus, because since they lose the body from Ash, it's kind of difficult for them to use the second effect of it. They have to do a really awkward line where they play into Nibiru, make Promethean, revive the Ash, and at that point, if you have other hand traps, it really does do a lot of damage. Ghost Ogre, this is a card that Gary Gass has been talking about, GGYGO, on his channel. I think this card is not very good. He's been praising this card. I think this card, at its very, very best, doesn't even trade with that much. If they do the play that plays around Nib by using Ash to send the Sanctuary, and then they go Field Spell effect and you Ogre it, they still get to trigger the effect of Flameburge when it hits the graveyard, especially when 2 back, so they can still kind of play from there. And honestly, a hand trap that doesn't have the ability to end their turn, even in its best case scenario, and it plays into Talents and Thrust, I'm not a big fan of. I'm going to stick it down here in super specific. Retaliating Sea. This is a card that's received a lot of hype for its interaction with original Snake Eye. The original Snake Eye cards are very, very not good. They're pretty bad when you get shifted, right? And that's what Retaliating Sea does. The only difference with Retaliating Sea is that you can use Retaliating Sea and then link it away or get rid of it from your field. That way you're not under the same shifter restriction. And it does tend to stop their turn. A couple of different grievances with this card though. It's really easy to climb onto a Little Knight and then Little Knight out this card. It's the Retaliating Sea is really not that hard to deal with. It not only plays into Talents, but Thrust to Search as well. So Retaliating Sea is pretty easy to deal with, although it does have very high potential. I'm going to stick it in the situational tech option card slot. And then Magnut here. Magnut in other Bestials have a very interesting position in this next format, because it does hit 2 very important decks. It hits the Voiceless Voice deck, but it also hits the Branded deck. The Branded deck has started to see more popularity, more people playing it, but it's still a tier 2 deck, right? It's still a deck that was printed in like 2021 or whenever the deck was printed, and it's honestly dying out. Even if when you're gimmick puppeting people, it's not that consistent to do. It loses to hand traps, and the deck doesn't have that much power going second, and it certainly doesn't have as much grind game or killability, for lack of a better word, as the Snake Eye deck. So I'm going to stick this in situational tech options, but it's definitely higher than some of the other cards. Bell. I think that Bell is mandatory in your side deck, if not in your main deck. This card is absolutely insane against the Snake Eye deck. For when they go link away the Flameburge, and then use the Flameburge's effect to summon back, if you Bell that effect, it's really hard for them to extend past that, because they don't have a supplemental engine like Fire King to get the extra bodies they need to finish their combo. And even if they have something like Crossout, they have to be playing a situational card in their deck like Bell to begin with to make that Crossout have value in that situation. Bell also has a really positive interaction when you're playing the Fire King deck and you're going first, because if they activate Soul Release on you and they try to banish 5 cards from your graveyard, it's really, really value if you can hit that with a Bell, stop that card there, trade your non-engine for their non-engine. Not to mention the card could have hit engine if it needed to. So that's one reason that I'm really liking Bell for this upcoming format. Cherries, I think this card is not very good. I wanted to talk about it instead of just sticking it right away in the not viable option. But from my point of view, if in the middle of tier limit format where everyone's playing the same deck and Kit Kalos is a mandatory card that you need, if we weren't playing Cherries then, why would we play it now? Right? Like we can extend past losing one extra deck card in almost every situation. And discarding a card already puts you at a hand advantage, plays into talents, plays into thrust. Not to mention, like, it's a dark, right? They can use dark, take it, and then climb up. This card is not that good, and I don't think this card will see playability in the near future at all. Imperm, I think Imperm is by far the best non-engine card of the format. It doesn't play into talents, has very, very high upside of ending their turn. Using this on Ash trades positively even if they have Kieran. Absolutely, I love Imperm. It works as a 6th card as well, kind of a board breaker if it needs to be. Big fan of this card for this format. Nibiru. Nibiru is one of my favorite cards for non-engine, especially right now. People are doing combos that kind of play around Nibiru, but there's two very high weak points to those combos that play around Nibiru, and it's the fact that they play around Nibiru by their faking that they have a second princess, waiting and hoping your opponent doesn't Nibiru you on the island effect, or by just making Appaloosa early, and then even if you nib them later on the Appaloosa, it still wastes the Appaloosa negate. You get to keep the Nibiru in your hand. They summon a lot of times on your turn as well, so you have the chance to nib them again on your turn, and then turn 3, even if you have half a board set up, if you've made like an Appaloosa for 2 and a Little Knight, and that's your board and that's what you're living on, if you have those two plus the Nibiru that you've been sitting on for a couple turns now, it's really, really hard to break that board and kill you. So I'm a big fan of Nibiru for this format. Not to mention, specifically in that Apple example, if they do Appaloosa negate the Nibiru, they can't talents look at your hand, because since it negates activation, no monster effect was activated. Lancia is pretty copium. This card in the OCG format was used to not just stop non-engine, but also stop engine decks, like the Ritual Beast deck, the Infernoid deck, but fortunately for us, we don't have those type of cringe decks here right now. So this card's only really used to stop non-engine things like Soul Release, Called by the Grave, Evenly Matched, Cosmic, but it's really not worth putting a card in that doesn't have any type of interaction point except against their non-engine. At least with Bell, when you're belling their non-engine, like Soul Release, like Called by the Grave, it also has the ability to hit their engine pretty hard. DD Crow, this card is a little bit better than Bestials in my opinion. The only problem with DD Crow is that it puts a dark in your graveyard, and we talked about putting monsters in your graveyard that you can just kind of steal with a Charmer to make a Promethean with. Not to mention, even though DD Crow is versatile and it can hit lots of decks, it doesn't hit them very impactfully, except against the Voiceless deck, but that deck is not that powerful. Deck's kind of copium as well. For the time being, it definitely gets a lot better in the future. But DD Crow doesn't have that high impact. It plays into the talents, and it can get darked. However, I do think it's a little better than Bestials because it has more versatility. Shifter, if you can play Shifter, play this card. Absolutely play this card at 3, 5, 6, 7. I don't care how many you play, just play the card, right? I know that Steven Santoli likes to play 2 of this in his Exo Sister deck. No hate to him, but please do not do that. That was like a format thing, which it's totally fair to believe so for that format. But for this format, if you can play the card, play the card. You want to draw this card. If you draw the card, you have a very high chance of winning. Why would we not max out on a card like that? Droll and Lockbird. Droll and Lockbird I would put in the side deck staples section, even though I'm not really sure if I would play this card. The problem with Droll is that you've seen in the other combo videos, if you draw Snake Eye Ash and you get Drolled, you kind of end on the full Snake Eye board anyways. It doesn't really affect you. It's not like it wastes extra cards in your hand. But the reason I would put Droll in side deck staple option is because you can also use this card when you're going first, right? So if you set up a half board, like you get hand trapped 2-3 times even, and you end on like Little Knight plus Promethean and like a random guy that you can destroy, right? That board plus a Droll is probably enough to end their turn. It's really hard to climb up and use things like bonfires, extenders, and different ways of pushing through boards when you're Drolled. And making a half board plus Droll is very powerful. Not to mention there are still decks like Manadium in the format that get Drolled and they lose pretty hard. Effect Veiler is probably the third best hand trap of this format. I put it right after Nibiru. Veiler is very interesting because it does do the same thing as Imperm, but it plays into talents. However, the card has the same interaction points as Imperm. If they normal Ash, you Veiler it, they chain Kieran, still did its job, traded with multiple things even when they had the out for it. So big fan of Effect Veiler here. And the last two cards I have here in the tier list are Cyframe Gamma and Cyframe Delta. Cyframe Gamma, absolutely insane. If I could draw this in every single hand, I would absolutely play this card in my deck. Even if I drew Gamma and Driver in my hand, I would play this card still. It's Solemn Strike on legs. The OCG's favorite choice right now for a go first card is Solid Strike, because when they normal summon Ash and activate effect, if you strike that, it not only gets rid of the body, but it negates the effect, can't be used again. And that's what Gamma does, right? The only problem with Gamma is that it's at 1 and it requires a brick to play with it. So I'm going to stick it right now in the situational tech option. But following up Gamma, the Cyframe Delta here has very, very neat interactions as well. So the problem with hand traps this format is that there's so much talents running around that you get your hand looked at, they play through the rest of your hand traps, and then you're really sad. Even if they don't have the ability to play through the hand trap originally, talents drawing to is really good, right? So if you could play hand traps and get rid of the threat of talents by playing Delta, that's something that you should absolutely do, right? If you could Valor them on their Ash, they go talents, look at your hand, and you Delta that, and then they go Bonfire and you Ash it, they're really, really sad, right? I know that's like a 3-card combo. That could be any example of hand traps, right? And even when Delta doesn't negate talents exactly, every deck in the format is using spells as part of their engine to climb up and get to their combos, right? So Delta still has the ability to interact there and stop their combo like it's just a normal hand trap. And not to mention, probably the biggest plus side to playing Delta is that it's only one additional card to play Gamma in the side deck. So for a 5-card package, 1 Gamma, 3 Deltas, and a Driver, you're getting a lot of power in those 5 slots. I think those should definitely be tested. If you're looking at different cards to try in your side deck, I would really recommend the Gamma and Delta package. But that's it for the tier list itself. I did want to say before we go here, only about 16% of you guys are subscribed. If you guys wouldn't mind subscribing, it does mean an absolute lot. I'm trying to get the channel a little bit bigger, and I would really appreciate your support. But thank you so much for watching today, guys. You guys have a great day.